Very late. We've been very patient so far.
You have indeed.
We are learning. We are after last week's extravagance of not learning anything in the Mimer at all, but instead listening to me for an hour. We are returning back to the Mimer. We're going to start at the beginning again of chapter 2 because we didn't really get very far into it the last time we did it. So we're just going to start from the beginning again. Tonight's class is Le'ilui Nishmas Tzvi Yaakov ben Shmuel Aaron, who is my maternal grandfather, is my mother's father. She's sponsored the food and the refreshments for tonight's class. So God willing, his soul should have an aliyah, and he should have a lichtike Gan Eden.
Amen.
The benefit of the Torah that we're learning.
We're learning about cake. So, this is from Torah?
No, this is from Tzvi Kilov. The extremely kosher kitchen of Tzvi Kilov.
Okay, we are at the beginning of chapter 2, which is on page 33 in our copies.
And then 25. Chapter 2.
Ach lahavin. However, it is necessary to understand. Seemingly there is a contradiction in these words. That the existence of God and the fact that He vivifies and He maintains, constantly gives life to the world, is invested within the world to give it life, is not included in faith. As you'll remember, we've defined faith as that faculty of the soul which grasps the godliness, the aspects of godliness that are not invested within the world, right? Which means that the aspects of godliness which are invested in the world, in other words, God is as a creator, God as the one who is invested within the creation, that you can know, that you don't need faith for. Rather, it is something that you can literally know. Seemingly, this idea that God, as He is invested in the world, is known, and God, as He is removed from the world, is not known, but is rather connected to through faith, is connected to through a separate faculty. Seemingly, this contradicts something that it says in the Zohar. That the Zohar says that He cannot be grasped by the mind at all. Umashma, which implies that the creations are not able to grasp Him with their knowledge and their understanding at all. Seemingly, God can't be grasped. It says in the Zohar, thought cannot grasp you at all. Thought cannot grasp Him at all. Referring to Hashem, if thought can't grasp Him at all, how can we say that there's aspects of godliness which we can understand? But the truth is, this is not really any true contradiction. And everything is true and upright. Both of these statements are true, and they are not in contradiction. This is according to what the Rambam says, that God, may He be blessed, is known in His existence, but not in His essence. That we know God, we know that God exists, but we don't know what God is. We know His metzias, that He exists, but we don't know His mahus. We don't know what He is. What's the obvious question based on what we've learned until this point in Hamanas Elokus? The obvious question is that we were just saying in the previous chapter that we do know what the Rambam says that you can know about God. The truth is, the Rambam says that that's The truth is, the Rambam says that that's faith. Okay. Fair enough. It's interesting. The Rambam's the classical philosophical position that the Rambam holds is very interesting because the Rambam uses a system of learning called negative theology, or what's called in Hebrew Yedias HaShlila, that you only negate things from Hashem. You don't actually know anything about Him in the positive. And even among his philosophical peers, the Rambam was very emphatic about this. This is something that you could say is uniquely an emphasis of the Rambam. That the Rambam was emphatic that there is no word, there is no term, there is no description that you can use to actually describe what God is.
So is that like by deduction?
No, you say what is
No, not by deduction or induction, neither.
elimination.
Sort of. It's not really by anything. You can't really know God. You can't know what God is at all.
Beyond our grasp.
Yeah, God does not exist within any definition. But then the Rambam also says that the purpose of all of life is to know God. So how does this work? The purpose of all life is impossible to achieve, is impossible to attain, and the answer is that you can work at what you don't know, so that what you don't know in some sense approaches the Creator. In other words, the way that a simpleton on the street who hasn't thought about it at all doesn't know God is very different than the way the Rambam doesn't know God. Right? There's a difference. Even though ultimately neither of them know, there's a difference in how you don't know. This is the famous statement that Tachlus Hayidiyah Shalei Neda'acha. I think it's a statement of Rav Saadia Gaon that the ultimate knowledge is to know that you cannot be known. That is the ultimate knowledge. The ultimate knowledge is to know that you can't truly know God. Fine. So the Rambam, we did say in the previous chapter that the Rambam, what the Rambam calls emunah, what the Rambam calls faith, is knowing that God is the most perfect and the first of all creation. Now remember, the Kabbalah says that that's something that can be known, right? The Rambam is of the opinion that can't be known, and there's I touched on if we looked more into some things I said last week, we could explain why. I'm not going to get into that right now. But let's leave it at the idea that you can rewatch and re-listen to last week's class, and it fits. It fits that the Rambam would say faith is that God is the most perfect and the first of all beings upon who depends on nothing and upon whom all else depends. And it makes sense that Kabbalah would say that that's something you can know. That's not something you need faith for. That's something that can be proven. That's something that's within knowledge. Fine. In any case, whatever you want to say that God is, the Rambam says you can't know it. You can only know that God is. You cannot know what God is. You cannot know the true nature of the Creator. Continues the Tzemach Tzedek, v'kein b'chol sifrei haemes, and so too it is in all the works of truth. Which you have a footnote which says this phrase is used to describe the wisdom of the Kabbalah. Apparently sifrei haemes, I'm not really familiar, but apparently sifrei haemes is a phrase that's used to describe Kabbalah. So the Tzemach Tzedek is saying that the Kabbalah agrees, right? It's always very important to have it clear in your head. Just because the Rambam says something doesn't necessarily mean it applies across the board, right? To some extent, Hasidus views the Rambam as a subset of the truth rather than the whole truth or everything that there is to say, as we spoke about as could also be derived from last week's class. So the Kabbalah agrees that when speaking about God, you can only know that He is, but you cannot know what He is. What do we mean to say by this? That we, from His actions, know that He exists. In other words, you can look at the world and come to a logical, upon this everyone agrees, you can look at the world and you come to a logical conclusion that there is a Creator. Right? This the Rambam would agree you can know, and the Kabbalah would agree you can know. You can know that there is a Creator, the general knowledge that there's a Creator. But we do not know how or what He is. We don't know the true nature of the Creator. Now, the truth is that even in the Rambam's understanding, to say again, because of the negative theology and the way the Rambam learns in negatives, the Rambam does end up saying things about God, but everything is very qualified. It's a very unusual way of learning. It's really hard to get into that mindset where, the Rambam does say that God has to be. He goes through the whole thing. God has to be infinite, and is not necessarily comprised of parts, and it doesn't have a body, right? And all these things. But really, the things that you know from the world that you say about God and the Rambam's understanding are all negative things. You're not saying what God is. All you're saying is what He's not. You're saying He doesn't have a body. You're saying He's not limited to parts. He's not limited in that way. He's not limited in this way, right? So even according to the Rambam, even according to the philosophical understanding, even when the Rambam says that it's obvious, as all classical philosophers do, more or less, that I shouldn't say all, as all, let's say, philosophers of the Rambam's way of thinking see things. When you look at the world and you say that there is a God, you don't know anything in the positive about that God. You cannot make any statement about that God. All you can say is that I know that this world demands a creator, right? It demands something that is not the world, demands something that is not the world to have created it. Or limited and contingent beings need something that is non-limited and non-contingent. Note the use of the negative, non-limited and non-contingent, to create it. What does it mean to be non-limited and non-contingent? What is the nature? What is the definition of these things that God is? We have absolutely nothing to say on the matter. To the extent, by the way, and just take a brief moment to talk further about the Rambam, that the Rambam says that when we say, the Rambam says that right, a Jew and a believing Jew can say, God loves me, right? According to the Rambam's philosophy, what does it mean that God loves me? It means actions happen to me that I attribute to the Creator that are like actions that I would attribute to a loving person if that person did them to me. So in other words, let's say my parents feed me or my parents embrace me. I feel that God feeds me. God provides for me. God provides for my livelihood, right? So my just as when my parents act in love, they feed me and they provide for me, so too God provides for me, and therefore I assume or I say that He loves me. But the Rambam says to actually say that God feels love or to attribute any action or definition to God whatsoever, to say that God is a loving God, is categorically false according to the Rambam. Absolutely. And it goes way further than that. It goes to the famous extent, which is also not really for tonight, maybe some other time, to the famous extent that the Rambam says that you can't even say that God exists. Even saying He exists is too much. Right? You say He doesn't not exist. Say that God exists in the past. Existence, especially in the Rambam's philosophy, has a very specific definition. To exist means something quite precise, and the Rambam demonstrates that God does not fit within that definition. So everything is negative. It's a very different way of thinking than we're used to.
But still, we attribute all kinds of things to Him, like Shloshet Midot HaRachamim.
Yeah. But to the Rambam, at least to the Rambam, let's leave it at the Rambam for the moment. At least to the Rambam, it's all actions. It's things that come out from Him. It's not Him. You can't know anything about Him, and you can't judge it. In other words, what I just said is, that just because God does actions that seem loving, don't mean you can say that God loves you. Right? So we know about Him, we know nothing. The actions that come out seem to be the actions of someone that loves you. But to say that God loves you, the Rambam would never go to that far.
And that's in contradiction with what it says?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily. I'm just saying, let's just speak about the Rambam for a moment. Okay. So we know that God is from His actions. What He is, all of these things prove nothing. They prove nothing to us. We don't know what God is at all. On this, the famous verse from Eov says, can an understanding of God be reached? Or can if you examine Him, will find Him, so to speak? If you explore God, you find an understanding. What does it mean to know that He exists, but not to grasp His essence? Can be understood from the analogy that we had in the first chapter. The analogy we had in the first chapter was that just as the soul gives life to the body, so too God gives life to the world. That a person knows and feels that he has a living soul because he sees that his body is alive, right? In other words, what's the analogy? The analogy is what's the action in the active world, in the world of action, things that I can really pin down. Yeah, I see that my body is not, God forbid, a corpse or it is not a dead being. It has life, right? Ultimately, what's the explanation of that life in a causative sense? What gives cause to that life? I have no idea. All I can tell you is that there's a difference between a body and a person who's alive. There's something additive. There's something different there. There's some different cause that causes the person to be alive that is not purely that is not purely the body. Okay? And this too, you only know that the soul exists. Right? I'm at the top of page 35. Because it is clear to him that there is a soul in his body. Right? Ironically, this is the Tzemach Tzedek's example of what's clear, even though, as we mentioned in chapter 1, that the modern scientific understanding has not done wonders for this analogy, even though the modern scientific materialist understanding is not... we shouldn't expect, there's no reason to expect more of it. Let's put it that way. It's an endeavor set up not to understand that there is a soul, so it shouldn't be a surprise when it comes to the conclusion that there isn't one. Let's just put it that way. But the analogy is that we have a soul. Something makes the body alive. I know that it's there. I know there's something that makes me alive, that makes me not, God forbid, a corpse, a dead body. But I don't know what this thing is. I have no idea what the being and essence of this soul is. I also don't understand even how it is invested within the body, right? It's not just that I don't understand it itself. I don't understand the extent or the way in which it's involved in my body. Even though I know clearly that it is invested in all 248 limbs of the body. As we know in Torah, the body has 248 organs or limbs, 248 distinct parts. And Chassidus emphasizes many times that the soul is invested within the whole body. Right? It's an interesting dichotomy. We say that the soul dwells mostly in the brain when talking about the physical location of the soul, which is a weird thing to do. There's different. Depends what you mean by soul. There's different things, but yeah, you're right. Good point. So let's expand it. Let's say sometimes we say mainly in the brain, sometimes we say mainly in the blood. But Chassidus always emphasizes that even though usually, if I'm not mistaken, the analogy that's used is just as the king has a palace, but his rulership extends over the entire land, so too the soul is invested in particular limbs or particular parts of the body have a special connection to the soul. The soul is particularly, it's so to speak housed or has that as a vessel, but its rulership and its connection and its investiture is within the entire body. And what's the famous proof is what we're going to say now. Chassidus' famous proof that the soul is in the entire body. That immediately when a person desires to move his foot, he moves it immediately without any delay. Now, let me continue, and then I'll tell you about the mistake I made when I used to learn this. And if the soul rested in his heart or brain alone, his brain or heart alone, and from there his will was drawn to his foot, and then his foot moved, there would have to be a great delay to suffice for the transportation of the will from the mind to the heart. Right to the heart. That's interesting. And we see the opposite of this, that immediately when he desires to move his foot, he moves his foot. This shows that that thought exists in a person's foot. thought has a presence in a person's foot.
Going through the heart, that's kind of like you mentioned that you sort of, why the heart?
It's interesting. I don't know. I didn't catch that in my first.
Because the nefesh behemi,
I didn't catch that.
that.
I didn't catch that in my first run through. From the heart, liba, we say normally liga palig l'chulu shayfen. I think it says somewhere that the heart spreads to all sides. That the general order of things is that a person has a thought. The thought descends into emotion and into his heart, and from the heart spreads to the rest of the body. The heart is what powers action and gives life to the whole body. So that's why it says from the brain to the heart. But here's the interesting thing. So what's the argument? The argument is, it's not really brought to necessarily prove anything here. All we're saying is that it's almost an aside, that I'll explain it anyway. The soul, we're saying that the soul is something that makes the body alive. We only know that it exists, but we don't know what it is. And we don't even know how it interacts with the whole body. But we do know that it's within the whole body, that the soul itself has a direct connection to the foot. It's not just that the soul is in the brain, and then the brain affects the rest of the body as a as a command center. The whole body, each part of the body is connected to the soul, direct connection. What's the proof? The proof is that if you want to move your foot moves immediately. If the soul were only in the brain, it would take a long time to move your foot after you desired to move it. Now, the mistake you can make, especially coming from a more scientific way of thinking, is that I wasn't going to say reflexes. I was going to say that what Chassidus says, what happens instantly isn't really instant, right? It takes time. There are signals that move from the brain to the foot that cause it to move, right? But that's not the point. That's not what we're saying. And when he says that it would take a long time if the soul weren't in the foot, he doesn't mean a long time like 2 seconds. He means actually a long time, because that's not what he means. He doesn't mean instantaneous, literally instant. What he means, what the Chassidus means when it says this example, is that if you think about it, right, let's say a dog is a good example. Let's say you have a dog, right? Now you have to train the dog to get it to do what you want it to do, right? Whether you train it with positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement, whatever you do, you have to train the dog. Now here's the stupid question. The stupid question is, why do you have to train the dog? Why can't you just tell the dog to do it and the dog does it? Right? Aside from the fact that it's an independent being, which is a separate issue. But dogs, maybe people are worse, and that's a different point. In any case, the reason why you have to train a dog is because a dog is not naturally a vessel for intellect. The dog doesn't understand instructions. You can't speak to a dog. A dog doesn't comprehend. The dog doesn't comprehend the weighing of relative options and then choosing the option that makes sense according to a plan. That's an intellectual thing. That's not something a dog can do. So what you have to do, because the dog is not a natural recipient of intellect, is you have to take what is a complex idea, right? The complex idea is, what's a complex idea? A complex idea is when someone sticks out their hand, you have to raise your paw to try to shake the hand, right? You're trying to elicit a complex response, right? They have to see something and react in a certain way. Now, you don't get that message across by directly sharing the thought. If you could directly share the thought, what you'd say is raise your paw, and when someone sticks out their hand, raise your paw. Very simple. What you have to do instead is you have to take the complex idea and you have to lower it down. You have to basically translate the complex idea into very simple responses to either positive or negative reinforcement, right? So every time you lift up the dog's paw or whatever, I don't know how they train dogs, but you lift up the dog's paw or whatever, when you stick out your hand, you lift the paw, you give the dog a treat. And you repeat that day after day after day. And you can't tell the dog to do something. You have to bring the intellect down into a language the dog understands, and the only language the dog understands is pain and pleasure. Right? So a person's foot theoretically should be exactly the same as the dog. In fact, a foot should be worse than a dog, because a dog has a brain. A foot doesn't even have a brain, right? Why should a foot be able to understand your desire to walk? right? Why should a foot be able to? How should the intellect be?
Not independent.
How should will?
Not independent of the soul.
Yeah, but it's not just the independence. You understand? It's a language translation thing. It has nothing to do. Let's say you have the most obedient dog and the most obedient foot in the world, right? Even if the dog is the most obedient dog in the world, there's still a language translation issue. And language translation takes time because you have to take what's in one language and put it in a different language. You have to take what's in the language of the mind and put it in the language of the dog, which only understands pain and pleasure, right? The same thing should be with the foot, basically. This is what Chassidus is saying. The same thing should be with the foot. Even though the foot doesn't have the mind of its own, how can the mind tell the foot to do something, to do something or to act in the language of the mind, right? In other words, how can your thought that I want to kick this ball in a certain way actually make your foot do the correct thing instantaneously, right? Now the truth is that for simple motions of the foot it is instantaneous because we say the soul is invested within the entire body. But the truth is that if you do have to teach your foot something exceedingly complex, right, like how to dance ballet, you actually do have to train it, right? But that's for exceeding
the beauty of the leg, not because of the understanding of the leg.
Yeah, same as the dog doesn't understand either. I don't understand.
No, I mean, in my mind, I can do a flip backwards, but my body cannot do it.
Right,
it's
right.
a limitation
Sure.
of death.
No,
you know?
absolutely. Right.
I know
sure.
which order to give it, but
Sure, but you can train yourself to do a flip backwards with enough work and enough will.
no.
When you were young.
What do you mean? What do you mean?
Injuries.
Younger.
People who have like brain injuries are able to learn how to use the other side of the brain.
40 is the new 14.
That's right.
So, long short, the
God is unknowable,
yeah.
notwithstanding instructions in the Torah to service.
Yeah.
How do we know what would make us think that God wants some form of obeisance and
The simple answer is revelation and commandment. Philosophically, there's answers as well, but that's not simple. It's not for now. I imagine.
It's one thing to say God is unknowable.
Right.
And it's another thing to say, but we know this.
Right. No, absolutely. I agree. It's two separate. It's the classic. I mean, that's the oldest philosophical challenge to religion, I think, basically that there is. That's the question. The question is, okay, granted there's an infinite unknowable God, how can you say that he cares, knows about, and desires something from a limited world? That's the classic. That is the question. It's a very good question.
When you say unknowable, it's coming from a different. You say unknowable, whatever we can grasp, we just don't. It's just you can't put a definition on. You can't sort of say that's what God is.
In classical philosophy, the summary of something like what the Rambam would tell you as an answer to that question is that the commandments that God gives is the greatest possible good that a person can know. God Himself is goodness and being itself, and the lack of privation. He lacks, and the entire purpose of creation is that we should apprehend Him. And to be able to grasp God and to be able to have a grasp or intellectual grasp of the Creator, which the Rambam says is in this negative way, remember, is the entire purpose of life. And to be able to do that, which is an idea that's actually fallen out of vogue, but that to attain that level of intellectual acuity and to be able to truly understand what God is not, you have to live a moral life. That's what the Rambam would say. Something like that, anyway. Okay, so that was all in the thought. So the soul is invested in every part of the body because the foot can move instantaneously. Therefore, we see that because there doesn't have to be this translation, because there doesn't have to be a translation like to the dog and a training for every single motion, we see that the soul is invested in every part of the body. Okay. And so we have clarified the existence of the light of the soul spreading into all limbs of the body. So even though we understand that the soul must be in every part of the body, we still don't understand how it is invested in the body. We still don't understand what's the interaction. I understand that my soul must have some direct effect on my foot if I'm able to will something in my soul and move my foot instantaneously without any translation process. It must be that my soul's connection to my will and my soul's connection to my foot must somehow be of a level, right? Because otherwise, how could it be without some sort of translation or training process? How can I even move my foot instantaneously? And nevertheless, I still don't understand what it means that my soul should be connected to any aspect of my body whatsoever. What does that even mean? How is the soul giving life to my body? How is the soul connected to my foot or to my brain, for that matter? I have no idea.
Assistance through neurons.
Sorry?
Assistance through neurons.
What do you mean?
Like the body has all kinds of different muscles and neurons,
Mm-hmm.
and it knows exactly how to react. So when the soul says something or does something,
Right.
it reacts.
No,
Right,
but
so
if
how
you
is the...
neurons on a dead body, will it have the same effect?
That's not the real question. The real question is, how does the soul talk to the neurons?
Oh.
The scientific answer would probably be with smaller neurons. It's very satisfying. So we still don't understand how the soul is invested in the body. And certainly we don't understand what the soul itself is. So we're setting up levels, as we like to do in Chassidus. We don't even understand how the soul interacts with the body. Never mind what the soul itself is. The soul itself, surely we don't understand. We don't even understand how the soul interacts with the body, which is a descent from the soul, right? So to speak. You would think the expressions of the thing are less than the thing itself if it's able to keep expressing them, right? Just like one word is not who you are. One word is just one word you said one time. So one motion of your foot from your soul, and you don't even understand how that happens. Surely the soul itself you don't understand, right? Let's see if these footnotes are interesting. Let's do footnote 6 and see if I manage to agree with the footnote maker. Were the soul to exist only in the brain and not in the foot's response to the mind's command would require a process of communication and interface, as one frame of reference relates to another. For example, when two people communicate, even though one is willing to do what the other says without any question, a communication process which takes time is necessary for the one to express his will and the other to understand it. With regard to the limbs of one's own body, such a process of communication is not necessary. The fact that the body responds instantaneously indicates that thought exists inherently, albeit in a hidden manner, in all of the body's limbs. I think that's pretty close to what I said. Okay. Okay. We are at the top of page 37. V'zeu inyan yedias hametzias v'le'asagas hamos. This is what it means to know that he exists, but not to know what he is. So too with regards to God. So that's the analogy. That's the metaphor. And so too it is when we speak of God. His existence is known. We know that there is a creator, the source of life, who gives life and brings into existence, gives life to and brings into existence the world. But the nature of his being, what he is not known. It is about this, when we say no thought can grasp him, this is what we mean. We mean no thought can grasp what he is, which is true. This everyone agrees on. Chassidus, philosophy, Kabbalah, everyone's in agreement that to actually know what he is, certainly to recognize literally what God is, no one can do. That is not something, thought cannot grasp him. He is simply not within the realm of being grasped by thought. He cannot be created by any. He cannot be grasped or understood by any creation. As is written famously in Exodus, in Shmos, you shall not see my face. Face. The word panim being connected to pnimius, being connected to my inner reality, my mahus, my essence. No one has seen it. No one has seen God's face. No one knows what God is. No one can know what God is. And in the Torah, when we say das, when we say know, this refers to yedias hametzias. This refers to knowing that something exists. But on the grasping of the essence, to know what something is, this is called seeing. So again, to know that something is called knowing. To know what it is called seeing. To know truly what something is called seeing.
I have a question.
Sure.
So at the giving of the Torah, Mount Torah,
Yeah.
when they heard lightning and saw thunder,
Yeah.
were they not more clued to actually grasping this whole concept of, or is that not a...
Really, the question is a broader question. The question is on prophecy in general, because what was happening in Mount Sinai was an experience of prophecy. That's a very interesting question. It's a question dealt with in Hasidus, Kabbalah, and philosophy. Everyone talks about it. The question of what does it mean to be a prophet? What are you actually seeing? What are you actually experiencing? Everyone agrees that what the prophet actually experiences is not God himself. Is not God himself.
Is not...
No.
What about Adam and Chava?
We say Hasidus would say, Kabbalah would say that prophecy is an experience of godliness, and the Rambam would say that prophecy is an experience of I guess you would say deep knowledge, something higher than intuition. He doesn't really have a concept of godliness, so you wouldn't understand godliness. You would understand something about the creation in a very deep and intuitive way, as the Rambam explains at great length in More Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed. Sorry, what were you saying, George?
What about Adam and Eve when they were created?
No.
They didn't have any...
No, to truly know what God is, nobody knows.
So it's not in the human experience.
No, it's not in anyone's experience.
If you experience it, you are it.
Awareness.
If you're
Sorry?
experiencing it, you are it.
More of an innate awareness.
What is?
No, I understand that.
Semblance of
Semblance of understanding.
Yeah. I mean, when the Rambam says that the purpose of all of life is to understand God, and he says that God himself cannot be explained, so there has to be some sort of intermediate point. There has to be something that's more than being ignorant and less than actually knowing God himself, which is impossible. And the Rambam explains the whole process through negative knowledge, through knowing what God is not. You can gain something that amounts to an understanding of the Creator. So when you understand that something exists, this is called das, this is called knowledge. When you understand what it is, that's called sight, or seeing something. Why? Shechush, I guess haru'us, huklila sagas muhuz davar hamuchash, because the sense of sight is a vessel to grasp the nature of the perceived object, to grasp the essence of the perceived object. As opposed to what we call das, what we call knowledge, is knowledge that it exists. So now the Tzemach Tzedek has to. We sort of have to go back and re-understand what we said in the first chapter, because there we said mibsari echse, right? We said that from my flesh I see God, right? And now we're saying that seeing means understanding what it is, and we just said that no one understands what it is. So what do we mean when we say from my flesh I see God in the first chapter? So we're going back and explaining that this is not the same sort of sight. That's why we say from my flesh. We don't say I see in the Holy Tongue. We don't say mibsari ere. Right? We don't say from my flesh I'll see in Hebrew. It says mibsari echza, from my flesh I will see in the which is Aramaic, and refers to the hinder part, the hinder part, the outer aspect. I see the outer aspect. It's not really seeing. When I say mibsari echza, it's not the same as seeing the essence of something. There's two different types of seeing. There's lesser seeing, which is indicated by the Aramaic, which any time, if you understand, like as the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya, that the further you get from the true Hebrew name of something, right, metaphorically, or if you can use gematria and convert it to numbers, you can say it in a different language. The further you get from the true name of something in the Holy Tongue, the further away you get from the truth of that thing, right? This is how you can learn it. You can learn things in Torah this way as well, which is what we're saying here. That when we say echza, when we use the Aramaic word for see, we're implying a lesser sort of vision, a lesser sort of sight. When we say from my flesh I see God, we mean an outer aspect of sight. Because true sight would actually be understanding what God is, and that's not something.
Just an acknowledgement?
Anyone can do. No, we explained in the first chapter that this sight from my flesh I see God is you can truly grasp the godliness that's invested within the world, right? But that's not the same as seeing. That's not the same as seeing God and truly understanding what He is.
I'd like to go back for a
No,
second.
cheza means see. It means see.
This idea that to understand what God is,
Yeah,
we have to go through the litany of what God is not.
yeah.
Is that correct?
Sort of, yeah. Sort of, yeah. So go on. What? So what?
It's not this, God is not this table, but it could be, because there's possibilities. God is not this
Yeah. I don't know if it would be at the level of going through every individual object, but yeah, go on.
Okay, so, all right, so, but that's a big thought, that to understand what He is, what God is, that He is.
Right.
What does it mean to say we have to know what God is not?
What do you mean? What do we mean by that? To know what God is not? It means that you have to come to it means the same thing in different systems of thought. It means the basic underlying. It means basically in the underlying sense. It means the same thing, which means coming to a very deep understanding of reality and what everything is, or in a different way of saying it, an understanding of what the creation is and how God created it and all that sort of thing, why it's created, what its purpose is, what's the nature of everything. When you come to the understanding of the nature of things, you see that there are imperfections. In everything, you have to understand the extent of its perfection, and by understanding the extent of its perfection and how high and how lofty it is, and really this applies not just to the Rambam, who would say it about things in our world, but about Kabbalah as well, which would say this even about spiritual things, understanding the spiritual worlds, the angels, the different levels of God's expression. At each and every level, you understand that there's a lack, that there's limitation, that this thing is not the first thing. And to truly first you have to truly understand that this thing is not God, you have to understand what it is first. You have to understand what it is, and then you understand that it's not God.
Maybe
Yeah.
I can answer it myself. So, God is not the reality that I think I know.
Do you think you know God?
No, I don't think that.
Right.
But I think I know who's at this table.
Right.
I think I know, roughly speaking,
Right.
who you are.
Right.
So those are things that I consider to be reality.
Right.
And that's knowable to me.
Sure. And that is,
Anything
yeah.
outside of my reality,
Yeah.
therefore, becomes part of the realm of God.
No. Not like that.
Not my personal reality, but reality as I...
Yeah, exactly. In other words, right. In other words, you're not going to understand that. You're not going to say that the 5 people in this room aren't God, but maybe the person I haven't met yet is God. What you're going to say is that from my deep understanding of what a person is, I understand that no person can be God.
Right. I mean, that what we see around us, what we individually and collectively perceive, which we would probably describe as reality, is not God, because what we see around us is knowable at an intellectual level.
Sure.
So you have to go beyond the intellectual.
But that's not the same. Just because I say that everything in I understand that everything I know is not God, doesn't mean everything I don't know is God.
Well, I'm not talking from a scientific.
Neither am I.
I'm just saying.
You
You have to draw the line. You have to say, I can understand this, I can understand that, I understand molecules, scientists.
No. But it's not like that. It's not. In other words, it's not. God is a specific notion. You're starting with the idea that something must be the creator of all contingent realities, and you're moving forward from there. It's not just like everything that's possible that I don't know about, I'm going to ascribe to just say that that's God. Okay, good. Okay. As we were saying, that seeing in the true Lashon HaKodesh term, in the Holy Tongue, means to understand what God is. That's why we say, we say in the Aramaic, seeing God as in not truly not truly understanding what he is. As opposed to va'ada, as opposed to das, which is grasping that something exists. Since, with regards to godliness, it is not possible to truly understand what it is, rather only to know that it is. This is fascinating because it's not just, right, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm reading this correctly, it's not just God that we can understand. Even godliness in its true form we don't understand, right? Even the Kabbalah's understanding that there's something that expresses God that is not God called godliness, even that we cannot truly know what it is, right? Which I guess is a sign that it's truly expressing God, right? If it truly expresses God, then it should be just as non-understandable as he is, right? So for example, the light of God, we would say the light that's in the world of Atzilus, the Ur of Atzilus, right? The Urus of Atzilus, the godly lights, the godly expressions in the highest of the four worlds, the highest world of Atzilus, you cannot really know what that is. You can't know what that is. You can't grasp the mahus of that. You can only grasp the Metzias, maybe even the Kalim also, maybe even the vessels also. So the light in the vessels of Atzilus is not, if you think this is abstruse, that's not for the light in the vessels of Atzilus is not for the faint of heart. The distinctions between them and what the difference is, and it's a whole thing. Okay, but the long story short is that God, you cannot understand what he is, you only understand that he is.
How about the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur in the...
God himself cannot be grasped by the intellect.
but the sight of the light
I don't know, we say that he saw a light in the basement. Is that what we say?
is light. He killed a lot of the Kohen Gadols in the second temple.
No, but it's valid because this is the place where godliness meets us in the Kodesh Kodashim, and the Kohen Gadol experienced something. I don't know if it's God, but they experienced something that nobody else could.
The Navi experiences something. In fact, even a person who's not a Navi in dreams can experience something. In fact, even in our day-to-day life, we experience something. It's a question of how sensitive you are. But knowing God, knowing what God is something that no one experiences.
Is the face considered, it says nobody ever saw the face of Moshe. Is
The
that
face of God.
metaphor of his essence? Or that's
Yes,
how it
yes.
is?
Panim, which means face, is often connected in Chassidus to pnimius. So the essence of the
Both.
person.
Panim is the outside.
So that
Panim
is
is the
Right.
inside.
It's an outer reflection
no
of
one's
the
ever
inner.
seen that, so we can't grasp that.
It's not just no one has ever seen it, guys. It's a categorically different. It is not graspable by intellect. It is not a matter of. It's not a matter of no one has grasped it. It's a matter of it's not in the same
Not grasp.
graspable. It's like when was the last time someone ate the Pythagorean theorem? It's just not. There's not. It doesn't. There's what's the connection, right? Same thing. L'chein nemar echse targum. That's why we say echse in the translation. V'charaim shel re'iyah, the translation and the hinder part of seeing. We don't really understand what God is. V'cheinu pirish haresa ladas ki avayu elikim. So too when we say you have been shown to know that Hashem is your God, which is the simple translation of the pasuk. The Kabbalah translation of the pasuk is that Havai is elikim, which is describing the unity of the Creator with the creation and the unity of different aspects of godliness as well. It means to say that this thing, that Hashem is Elokim, which we're not going to get into what that is tonight, but this thing, this unity that Hashem is Elokim, this you actually can know. And you can know it well enough that it's as if you see it with your own eyes. Masig Mohusai Ene Shum Brifyun Vishine Bechezek Amitas Bitter Mitziusai Etzlei. That you do not grasp what God is does not weaken or change at all the strength of the certainty of the truth of the clear certainty that God exists to him. Ki'ilu Raya Mamish, as if he sees it with his own eyes. Because he knows that it exists. Sorry, I totally misunderstood this pasuk. I apologize. Let me reteach this last thing in the last minute here. I totally misunderstood. I apologize. Erase the last 60 seconds of what I said. The verse says, Ata haresa ladas, right? You have been shown to know. What does this mean? The question is, what does this mean? It's a combination of both terms, right? We've say knowing means knowing that something exists. Seeing means knowing what it is. So what does it mean you have been shown to know? Right? It's a combination. And the answer is, that Tzemach Tzedek's been explaining, I apologize for explaining it incorrectly the first time. The explanation is that it's something that you know. You know that it exists, even though you don't really know what it is. But you know it so well that it's as if you see it with that you know that it is so well that it's as if you saw it with your own eyes, right? The same as I gave an example, I think, in a previous class, that when you can see a strange creature that you've never seen before and have no idea what it is, but no one can convince you that you didn't see it. Right? I have no idea what it is, but I definitely saw it. Or you could see a person that you don't know, and you don't know who he is, you don't know anything about him, but you know for sure, I did see him. Right? So it's the same thing here, that the truth and how true the knowledge that something exists is impacted not at all by how much you understand what it is. Again, the truth and the certainty that a person can have that something exists is not impacted at all by his knowledge or inability to grasp what the thing is. So that's why it says you've been shown to know. You can know it. You can know that this thing is true, that Hashem is Elikim, as if you see it with your own eyes, as if it's something that you've seen. Even though the term seeing itself is normally applied to grasping what the thing is, and not just that it is. Right? It's sort of a very specific. We're showing the application of our terms in the verses, so it can get a little technical.
Let's look at this sentence now, completely different.
Yeah, it can get a little technical, but that's what it is.
You showed the knowledge.
Yeah. So the summary is, we'll stop here for tonight. The summary is that knowing is knowing that something exists. Seeing is seeing what the thing truly is. Everyone agrees that God himself you cannot know what God is. However, you can see that he exists. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Is it similar to someone who believes that God exists because it says Bereshit Baruch, as opposed to the group that believes that Judaism is just a cultural event? It's not a God-induced event.
I'm not really sure if it's. I'm not really sure what the connection is, but.
Well, if you believe that Bereshit Baruch, that God created
heaven and the earth, yeah.
Well, basically, you believe in the Bible and the document, as opposed to the Reconstructionists.
Right. Absolutely. It's not just a document. It's the words of the living God, as we would say.